4th of June, 1940, Westminster, London. Winston Churchill stepped up to the dispatch box in the House of Commons. His voice rang through the chamber with defiant resolve. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall never surrender." The words electrified Britain. They electrified the world. But behind closed doors at number 10 Downing Street, Churchill was preparing for something his public speeches would never admit. He was preparing for Britain to fall, and in that preparation, he would authorize a secret mission that would change the course of the war. A mission that would carry Britain's most guarded scientific secrets across the Atlantic in a battered metal box no bigger than a suitcase. A mission that would arm the Allies with a weapon even Hitler feared. The summer of 1940 was Britain's darkest hour. France had fallen in 6 weeks. The British Expeditionary Force had escaped from Dunkirk by the skin of their teeth. 338,000 men saved, but they left behind every tank, every gun, every piece of heavy equipment they owned. Britain stood alone against the Nazi war machine. The Royal Air Force was outnumbered 3-1. The Royal Navy was spread thin across the globe. The British Army was scrambling to defend the coastline with whatever weapons they could scrape together. And Hitler was coming. Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. German generals massed troops along the French coast. They gathered barges and landing craft. They waited only for the Luftwaffe to destroy the Royal Air Force. Once Britain's fighter defenses were gone, the invasion would begin. Every intelligence report said the same thing. Germany would attack within weeks, possibly days. Churchill knew something the British public did not. He knew Britain could not win this war alone. The nation's scientific and industrial resources were stretched to breaking point. Every factory was working around the clock. Every laboratory was focused on immediate wartime needs. There was no capacity left for long-term research, no ability to turn promising scientific discoveries into mass-produced weapons. Britain had brains. Britain had brilliance. Britain had some of the finest scientific minds in the world working in university laboratories and government research facilities. But Britain did not have the industrial might to turn their discoveries into weapons fast enough to make a difference. For that, Churchill needed America. But America was neutral. The isolationists in Congress were powerful. President Roosevelt wanted to help Britain, but his hands were tied by American law and American politics. Churchill faced an impossible choice. Britain possessed scientific secrets that could change the war. Radar technology years ahead of anything the Germans had. Jet engine designs that could revolutionize air combat. Early atomic research that hinted at weapons of unimaginable power. But Britain could not exploit these secrets alone. The country simply did not have the resources. So Churchill decided to do something unprecedented. Something that made many of his advisors recoil in horror. He decided to give it all away. Every secret, every blueprint, every discovery. He would hand Britain's scientific crown jewels to America on a silver platter. In exchange, he would ask for American industrial capacity, American factories, American production lines, American resources. The man Churchill chose to lead this mission was Sir Henry Tizard. Tizard was not a household name. He was not a general or an admiral. He was a scientist, a reserved, methodical academic who chaired the Aeronautical Research Committee. But Tizard possessed something rare. He understood both science and strategy. He grasped not just how technology worked, but how it won wars. Tizard had been instrumental in developing Britain's radar network before the war, the Chain Home System. Massive radar stations dotted along Britain's coast that could detect incoming German aircraft 50 miles away. This radar network was the secret weapon that would save Britain in the Battle of Britain. It gave RAF Fighter Command advance warning. It allowed controllers to direct their outnumbered fighters to exactly where they were needed. It multiplied British effectiveness 5-fold. But radar had a problem. The existing systems used long wavelengths. The equipment was massive. The stations required huge steel towers and acres of antenna arrays. You could not put this technology on ships. You could not fit it in aircraft. For radar to truly revolutionize warfare, it needed to be smaller, much smaller. That meant shorter wavelengths, microwave radar. And for microwave radar to work, you needed a device that could generate enormous amounts of power at tiny wavelengths. 2 British physicists solved the problem. John Randall and Harry Boot worked at Birmingham University. In February 1940, they invented something called the cavity magnetron. The device was about the size of a hockey puck. It weighed less than 4 pounds, and it could generate 10,000 watts of microwave power. That was 100 times more powerful than anything that existed before. It was a quantum leap in technology. The cavity magnetron made everything possible. Radar small enough to fit in a night fighter. Radar powerful enough to detect a submarine periscope on the surface of the ocean. Radar precise enough to guide bombers through clouds to their targets. The Americans had been working on microwave radar for years. They had brilliant scientists at MIT and Bell Labs, but they were stuck. Their magnetrons could barely generate 10 watts of power. The British device generated 10,000. Tizard knew the cavity magnetron would change the war, but Britain could not build enough of them, not while fighting for survival. So in June 1940, Tizard proposed giving the technology to America. He would share everything: complete blueprints, working prototypes, all the manufacturing specifications. In exchange, American factories would mass produce the devices. Some would go to Britain, some would stay in America. Everyone would benefit. Churchill's scientific advisor, Frederick Lindemann, was horrified. Lindemann believed Britain should guard its secrets jealously. Technology was power. Give it away, and Britain would lose its advantage. Tizard disagreed. He believed secrecy was a fetish, a dangerous delusion. We are fooling ourselves if we put any trust in secrecy. Tizard told Lindemann, we can get enormous assistance from the Americans if we are prepared to give away what is fundamentally a fetish. The two men argued for weeks. Finally, in late July, Churchill made his decision. He approved the mission. Tizard would go to America. He would take a team of Britain's best scientific minds, and he would take every secret Britain possessed, everything that could help win the war. The team began gathering materials in August. Tizard assembled 6 men. Professor John Cockcroft, a nuclear physicist who understood atomic research. Edward Bowen, a radar expert who had worked on the chain home system. 3 military officers representing the Army, Navy, and Air Force. And Arthur Woodward Nutt, an Air Ministry official who would serve as secretary. They compiled everything into documents: plans for the cavity magnetron, designs for the proximity fuse, a revolutionary device that made anti-aircraft shells explode automatically when near a target, blueprints for Frank Whittle's jet engine, which would make propeller aircraft obsolete, the Frisch-Peierls Memorandum, a detailed scientific paper explaining how to build an atomic bomb, research on submarine detection, self-sealing fuel tanks, plastic explosives, gyroscopic gun sights, rockets, superchargers, everything. All of it went into a small metal box, a deed box, the kind solicitors use to store property documents. It was about 2 feet long, maybe 15 inches wide. Black metal with a simple lock. Inside that unassuming container lay the most valuable intelligence package ever assembled. Billions of pounds worth of research, decades of scientific work, the combined genius of Britain's greatest minds. Bowen also carried magnetron number 12, one of the 12 prototype cavity magnetrons built by GEC in August. It was packed in a wooden crate lined with felt. The device itself looked unremarkable, a copper cylinder with holes drilled around the edge, no bigger than a coffee mug. But that little copper cylinder was worth more than its weight in diamonds. The mission left Britain in early September 1940. Tizard flew ahead to make arrangements. The rest of the team traveled by ship. They boarded the Duchess of Richmond in Liverpool on the 1st of September. The metal box containing Britain's secrets traveled with them. Bowen kept the case close at all times. The night before the departure, the case spent the night under Bowen's hotel bed. The next morning, it was strapped to the roof of a taxi. At the station, an overeager porter almost ran off with it. Bowen had to chase him down. The Atlantic crossing took 5 days. 5 days of U-boat-infested waters. 5 days knowing that a single torpedo could send Britain's scientific secrets to the bottom of the ocean. But the Duchess of Richmond was fast. She sailed in convoy with Royal Navy escorts. The crossing was tense but uneventful. They landed in Halifax, Canada on the 6th of September. From there, they took a train to Washington. The team assembled in the American capital on the 12th of September, 1940. Tizard had already been meeting with American officials for nearly 2 weeks. He had arranged a series of meetings with the National Defense Research Committee. The NDRC was America's equivalent of Britain's scientific war effort. Its chairman was Vannevar Bush, a brilliant engineer and administrator who would later oversee the Manhattan Project. The first meetings were cautious. Both sides probed carefully. The Americans were intrigued but wary. Why would Britain give away its secrets? What did they want in return? The British were similarly careful. They needed to gauge American capability. Could American industry really deliver? Were the Americans advanced enough to understand what they were being shown? The breakthrough came on the 19th of September. Alfred Loomis, chairman of the NDRC Microwave Committee, hosted a meeting at the Wardman Park Hotel in Washington. Both delegations were present. The British started by describing their chain-home radar network. The Americans listened politely. Then they described their own radar system, the Navy's CXAM. The British realized with surprise that it was virtually identical to chain-home. The Americans had independently developed the same technology. The Americans then described their microwave research. They showed data from experiments done earlier that year. The British realized that Bell Labs and General Electric both had the technical expertise to contribute enormously to radar development. But the Americans admitted they had hit a wall. They had built experimental 10-centimeter radar, but the transmitter was too weak. They could not generate enough power. They were at a dead end. Bowen and Cockcroft looked at each other. This was the moment. Bowen opened the wooden crate. He carefully lifted out magnetron number 12. He explained what it was. A cavity magnetron, 10 centimeters wavelength, 10,000 watts output. The Americans were stunned. The power output was 100 times greater than anything they thought possible. One scientist asked if Bowen had made a mistake. 10,000 watts? At 10 centimeters? That was impossible. Bowen plugged it in and demonstrated. The numbers were real. The room erupted in excitement. The Americans immediately wanted to know more. How did it work? How was it manufactured? Could they see the technical drawings? Bowen handed over everything, complete blueprints, manufacturing specifications, even the prototype itself for them to study. There was a brief moment of confusion when the Americans X-rayed the magnetron. The drawings showed 6 cavities. Magnetron number 12 had 8. Had there been a mistake? Bowen cabled Eric Megaw at GEC back in Britain. Megaw explained that when he had ordered 12 prototypes, he asked for 10 with 6 cavities, 1 with 7, and 1 with 8, just to see which design worked best. There had been no time to update the drawings. Number 12 just happened to be the 8-cavity version. The Americans decided they preferred 8 cavities anyway. All American-built magnetrons would use the 8-cavity design. The disclosure of the cavity magnetron broke the ice completely. The Americans realized Britain was serious. This was not some half-hearted attempt to extract American help while holding back the good stuff. Britain was giving away its most valuable secret. Everything else flowed from there. The British showed designs for the VT proximity fuse. American scientists immediately saw its potential for anti-aircraft defense. They showed jet engine designs. American engineers recognized this would revolutionize aviation. They described atomic research. American physicists understood this could lead to weapons of unimaginable power. Meeting followed meeting throughout September and October. The British visited laboratories across America: MIT, Bell Labs, General Electric, Columbia University. Everywhere they went, they shared information, they answered questions, they collaborated on solutions. The Americans were amazed by British scientific sophistication. The British were awed by American industrial capacity. In one meeting, the British asked about the Norden bomb sight. This was America's secret weapon for precision bombing. President Roosevelt had personally ordered that it not be shared with anyone, not even Britain. Roosevelt apologized but said his hands were tied unless Britain could prove Germany had something similar. Tizard was not upset. He politely asked for the external dimensions of the device. If it might become available in future, he wanted British bombers modified to accommodate it. That pragmatic flexibility impressed the Americans enormously. The mission returned to Britain in November. By then, the foundations had been laid for unprecedented scientific cooperation. American factories were already tooling up to produce cavity magnetrons. MIT was establishing what would become the Radiation Laboratory, which would grow to employ 4,000 people and become one of the largest scientific projects of the war. General Electric was beginning work on jet engines based on Frank Whittle's designs. The foundations were being laid for what would eventually become the Manhattan Project. The immediate impact was radar. The cavity. Magnetron transformed radar from a strategic early warning system into a tactical weapon. British scientists had invented the device, but American industry produced it in quantities Britain could never match. Bell Labs alone produced over 1 million magnetrons by the end of the war. They went into thousands of different systems. Airborne intercept radar allowed night fighters to hunt German bombers in complete darkness. RAF Bow fighters and Mosquitoes equipped with AI radar decimated the Luftwaffe's night bombing campaign. German bomber crews called the British night fighters Spanner, Sky Scorchers, because so many of their comrades went down in flames. H-2S radar gave bombers the ability to see through clouds and darkness. A rotating radar scanner in a dome under the aircraft's fuselage painted a picture of the ground below. Cities appeared as bright blobs. Coastlines and rivers were clearly visible. Bombers could navigate and bomb accurately in conditions that previously would have grounded them. The first H-2S raid took place in January 1943 against Hamburg. It was devastatingly effective. ASV radar revolutionized anti-submarine warfare. Aircraft equipped with air-to-surface vessel radar could detect surfaced U-boats from miles away. Submarines had to surface regularly to recharge batteries and refresh air. Previously, they could do this safely at night. ASV radar ended that. Submarines surfacing at night suddenly found themselves illuminated by searchlights and under attack. The U-boat crews called it the Bay Offensive. In the Bay of Biscay alone, the RAF sank dozens of submarines in 1943. The Battle of the Atlantic turned on radar. In the first years of the war, U-boats were sinking ships faster than the Allies could build them. By 1943, the tide had reversed. Convoy escorts equipped with centimetric radar could detect periscopes and surface submarines. Aircraft with ASV radar could find and sink U-boats far from land. The Germans never developed adequate countermeasures. By mid-1943, Admiral Dönitz ordered his submarines to withdraw from the North Atlantic. The Allies had won. The proximity fuse was equally revolutionary. Before the VT fuse, anti-aircraft shells had to explode at exactly the right moment. That required setting a mechanical time fuse before firing. Gunners had to estimate the target's altitude and speed, set the fuse accordingly, and hope the aircraft would be there when the shell arrived. It was incredibly difficult. Most anti-aircraft shells exploded harmlessly. The VT fuse changed everything. A tiny radio transmitter and receiver in the nose of the shell bounced signals off the target. When the returned signal reached a certain strength, the shell exploded automatically. It did not need a direct hit. Passing within 70 feet was close enough. The fragments would shred an aircraft. The Americans mass-produced VT fuses in staggering quantities. Over 22 million were manufactured during the war. They were used against German V-1 flying bombs over England. They devastated Japanese kamikaze attacks in the Pacific. They turned anti-aircraft fire from a harassing nuisance into a deadly threat. German and Japanese pilots had no defense against them. The jet engine seemed less immediately crucial, but proved equally important. Frank Whittle had designed the first practical jet engine before the war, but Britain lacked the industrial capacity to develop it properly. The Tizard mission changed that. American engineers at General Electric took Whittle's designs and refined them. The result was the General Electric IA turbojet, which powered America's first jet fighter, the Bell P-59 Era Comet. British Gloucester Meteors entered service in July 1944. They were used to intercept V-1 flying bombs. The Meteor was 50 miles per hour faster than the V-1 and could easily catch them. RAF Meteors shot down 13 V-1s in their first month of operations. German Me-262 jet fighters entered service at the same time, but made little impact due to fuel shortages and limited numbers. The atomic research shared during the Tizard mission laid the groundwork for the Manhattan Project. British scientists had made crucial discoveries about uranium separation and bomb design. The Frisch-Peierls Memorandum calculated that a bomb could be built with about 25 pounds of uranium-235. That was far less than previously thought. It made atomic weapons suddenly feasible. American scientists had been skeptical about atomic weapons. When Cockcroft visited Enrico Fermi at Columbia University and described British atomic research, Fermi was dismissive. He believed nuclear fission was only useful for generating power, not weapons. But British calculations were too detailed to ignore. By 1942, American nuclear research was in high gear. British scientists contributed throughout the war, though after 1945, the McMahon Act cut off atomic cooperation for several years. The strategic impact of the Tizard mission cannot be overstated. Before September 1940, America and Britain conducted scientific research largely independently. Afterward, they worked as partners. Ideas flowed freely in both directions. British inventions were mass-produced in American factories. American innovations were refined by British scientists. The whole became far greater than the sum of its parts. Hitler feared this cooperation more than almost anything. German intelligence knew Britain had advanced radar. They knew about British jet engines and rocket research. What terrified them was the thought of British brains combined with American industrial might. German scientists were brilliant. German engineers were superb. But Germany could not match the combined resources of Britain and America working together. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, wrote after the war about the technological challenge Germany faced. He described how German scientists would make a breakthrough, only to find the Allies had already deployed the same technology in massive quantities. German radar scientists developed excellent equipment, but they could never produce it in the numbers the Allies could. German jet engines were revolutionary, but chronic shortages of rare metals and fuel meant few ever flew. The Tizard mission represented something profound about British character. Britain in September 1940 was fighting alone. The nation faced invasion and possible conquest. Every instinct screamed to hold on to every advantage, hoard every secret, trust no one. But Britain did the opposite. Churchill and Tizard gambled everything on cooperation. They believed winning together was better than losing alone. That gamble paid off spectacularly. American factories produced the weapons British scientists designed. British scientists refined technologies American engineers developed. The partnership forged in September 1940 lasted through the war and beyond. It became the foundation for NATO. The intelligence sharing arrangements established during the war evolved into the Five Eyes Agreement. The scientific cooperation continued through the Cold War and into the 21st century. The metal box that crossed the Atlantic in September 1940 carried more than scientific secrets. It carried trust. It carried partnership. It carried the belief that free nations working together could defeat tyranny. That unassuming black deed box, no bigger than a briefcase, contained the seeds of Allied victory. When Hitler heard about British radar technology, he demanded Germany match it. When he learned about British jet engines, he ordered crash programs to develop German jets. When German intelligence reported on British scientific advances, Hitler's response was always the same: match them, beat them, show German technological superiority. But he could not. Not because German science was inferior, it was not. Germany possessed brilliant scientists and engineers, but Germany was fundamentally alone. The Soviet Union was an ally of convenience, but shared nothing. Japan was fighting its own war in the Pacific with minimal coordination. Germany's actual allies, Italy and the minor Axis powers, contributed little technologically. Germany faced the combined industrial and scientific might of the British Empire and the United States with only its own resources. It was never an even fight. British scientific genius and American industrial might. That was the weapon Hitler feared. Not one brilliant invention, but an entire system of cooperation and mass production that could turn ideas into war-winning weapons faster than Germany could respond. The cavity magnetron was important. The proximity fuse was important. The jet engine was important. But the real weapon was the partnership itself. That partnership was born in September 1940 when a small team of British scientists carried a metal box across the Atlantic. They did not know if the mission would succeed. America was neutral. Many Americans opposed helping Britain. Congress was controlled by isolationists. President Roosevelt wanted to help, but was constrained by political reality. The British scientists took a leap of faith. They gave away everything. They held nothing back. They trusted that America would see the value of cooperation. That trust was justified. American scientists were amazed by what they were shown. American military leaders recognized the potential. American industrialists saw opportunities. Within weeks, cooperation was flowing in both directions. The British learned that American research in some areas was more advanced than their own. American radar receivers were more sensitive. American manufacturing techniques were more efficient. American quality control procedures were more rigorous. The exchange of knowledge went both ways. Both nations benefited enormously. By the end of the war, the scientific and industrial cooperation established by the TIZARD mission had produced thousands of innovations, radar in dozens of different configurations, improved bomb sights and gun sights, better engines and aircraft, more effective explosives and ammunition, improved medical treatments in field hospitals, better communications equipment, enhanced code-breaking machinery. The list was endless. Some historians argue the TIZARD mission was the single most important Allied mission of the war. That might be hyperbole, but it is not far wrong. Without the technology shared in September 1940, the war would have lasted years longer. Possibly Germany would have developed atomic weapons first. Certainly the Battle of the Atlantic would have dragged on, strangling Britain's supply lines. The strategic bombing campaign would have been far less effective. D-Day might have been impossible or catastrophically expensive. Instead, radar guided Allied ships and aircraft. Proximity fuses protected the invasion fleet from air attack. Electronic countermeasures confused German defenses. Improved communications coordinated the massive operation. Thousands of small technological advantages added up to overwhelming superiority, and it all traced back to that metal box carried across the Atlantic in September 1940. The cavity magnetron alone was worth the entire mission. James Finney Baxter, the official historian of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, wrote after the war that the cavity magnetron was the most valuable cargo ever brought to American shores. That was not exaggeration. Magnetron-based radar saved thousands of ships in the Atlantic. It guided thousands of bombers over Germany. It helped sink hundreds of submarines. It shot down thousands of aircraft. If you could calculate the value of all those military effects, it would be astronomical. But the TIZARD mission provided far more than the cavity magnetron. It established relationships. British scientists worked alongside American engineers. They attended the same conferences. They published in the same journals. They shared laboratories and equipment. Personal friendships formed that lasted decades. When the war ended, those relationships continued. They became the foundation for post-war scientific cooperation. The mission also established a template. Britain had shown that sharing technology made both parties stronger. After the war, this became standard practice among Western allies. NATO members shared military technology freely. Intelligence agencies coordinated operations. Scientific research became increasingly international. The tradition of cooperation and open exchange that began with the TIZARD mission became the hallmark of the Western Alliance. The Soviet Union took the opposite approach. Stalin hoarded secrets. Soviet scientists worked in isolation. Technology was not shared even between different Soviet ministries, let alone with allies. This paranoid secrecy crippled Soviet technological development. The Soviet Union never caught up with Western technology despite having brilliant scientists and massive resources. The difference was cooperation versus isolation. China today faces the same dilemma. Chinese leaders see the value of international scientific cooperation, but fear giving away secrets. They want Chinese scientists to work with Western researchers, but worry about technology transfer. It is the same problem Britain faced in 1940. Trust or hoard, cooperate or isolate. Britain chose trust. That choice won the war. The metal box that Henry TIZARD carried to America in September 1940 sits today in a museum. It is a small, unremarkable object, black-painted metal with a simple lock, about the size of a small suitcase. But inside that box traveled the future. Radar that could see through darkness and clouds. Fuses that exploded automatically. Engines that needed no propellers. Research that would lead to atomic weapons. More than that, the box carried a message. Britain was willing to trust America. Britain would share everything to build a partnership strong enough to defeat tyranny. That message resonated. America responded not just with industrial capacity, but with genuine cooperation. American scientists did not just manufacture British designs, they improved them. They developed new applications. They pushed the technology further than the British had imagined possible. That is what partnership means. Not one side giving and the other taking, but both sides contributing, both sides learning, both sides becoming stronger together than either could be alone. Hitler never understood this. He believed in domination, not cooperation. German-occupied countries were stripped of resources, not made into partners. German allies were subordinates, not equals. That approach might work for a while through intimidation and force, but it could never match the strength of genuine cooperation. The teasered mission proved that free nations working together were stronger than tyrannies working alone. That lesson remained relevant long after the war ended. During the Cold War, the Western Alliance faced the Soviet Union and its satellites. The West had NATO, with integrated command structures and shared technology. The Soviets had the Warsaw Pact, which was essentially the Red Army occupying Eastern Europe. The West had genuine allies. The Soviets had reluctant subordinates. When the Cold War ended, the difference was clear. Today, democratic nations still face authoritarian challengers. The principle established by the teasered mission remains vital. Free nations must cooperate, must share, must trust each other. Only through partnership can democratic countries match the focused resources of authoritarian states. Only through cooperation can they maintain technological superiority. Only through trust can they build alliances strong enough to deter aggression. The secret WWII order that armed Britain was not really a weapon at all. It was a decision, a choice to trust, a willingness to share, a recognition that cooperation was stronger than isolation. Churchill made that choice in July 1940 when he approved the teasered mission. Teasered implemented it in September when he handed Britain's secrets to America. American leaders honored it when they opened their laboratories and factories to British scientists. That choice, that trust, that cooperation, that was the weapon Hitler feared. Not the cavity magnetron specifically, though it was important. Not the proximity fuse or the jet engine or the atomic research, though all were vital. The weapon Hitler feared was the partnership, the alliance, the cooperation of free nations working together toward a common goal. Against that, Nazi Germany never stood a chance.